Welcome back. And if you're just joining us, welcome to this clothing optional meditation and Dharma talk with Jonathan Foust. It's just great to have this time with you. It's great to see so many people here from all over the planet. I'm very excited about tonight's talk. I think it speaks to these very, very weird times that we are living in. And just to share a little example, maybe that kind of like illustrates the topic for tonight. A number of years ago, I was invited to go to a Washington Redskins game. And what made this game special was that they were playing the New England Patriots with Tom Brady at the helm. And I'm not a gigantic sports fan, but they say that the sports most people watch are the ones they watch with their parents. And my dad would always be correcting papers with a football game on, and so I would kind of hang out with him. So I would follow football. And I lived in New England during the golden years of the Patriots. And I got just kind of slightly obsessed with the team and how they play and why they were so good. So this was, I know some of you will know this. This was the game where Tom Brady and Bill O'Brien got into a shouting match. I know this is completely irrelevant for most people, but some people will know exactly what this game is. Um, I was always a little bit enamored by the team, and when my friend Randy invited me to go to the Redskins game, I thought, wow, this would be great. Um, I had only been to one pro anything game before in my life with my friend Jeff, who is a sports writer in New York, who invited me to a Giants game. One of the things I noticed at this game, of course, was that people were pretty lubricated and they were relatively free to emote. We'll put it that way. And what I found so interesting, because of course Washington, D.C. is, has got a lot of people from New England. So there were a lot of New England people and, of course, a lot of Redskins people in the stands. And oh my God, it was just amazing because someone would fumble the football and then half the stadium would be going, oh, no, no. And the other team would be just elated. And then someone would drop a pass and half the people would be just crushed. The other half would be celebrating. And it was so the emotions were so alive with just unbelievable excitement and then just crushing defeat. And it just went back and forth the whole time. It just from elation to horrible tragedy. And I realized this is kind of like life. In some way, we're engaged in the ups and downs, and the drama is really, really exciting. And then on the other hand, it's just utterly overstimulating. At the end of that game, I was just so wiped out. This is life. We are, in some ways, we're addicted to the drama because we're so attached to the outcome. And what we're really finding ourselves is caught between the pull to pleasure and the avoidance of pain, pretty much the fundamentals. Is it possible to be free of that is what this talk is all about. And what I'd like to talk about is how do you cultivate steadiness in the midst of those fluctuations in life? What gets in the way of steadiness or equanimity? How do you cultivate it? And then what's the long-term plan for cultivating steadiness in your life? I remember a long time ago, some British actor was talking about when he was young, he got his first big break to show up on the Johnny Carson show. And back at that time, if you were on the show, that was the only thing in town and you were really, really well known. So he was getting some honors for something he had done. They could really see this was a doorway to a new career. And he was a serious actor. He'd worked really, really hard for a break like this his whole life. And as the story goes, he was out for dinner with his agent and his partner and with friends. They're very, very excited. And he was just very quietly and calmly eating his meal. And his friend turned to him and said, like, how could you just be eating this big meal so calmly before going on Johnny Carson? And he said, I am going to act normal if it kills me. You know what it's like when you can't wait for something to go away? You know what it's like when you can't wait for something to show up? Can you imagine a place inside that is neither for nor against anything? That points toward equanimity, toward a very, very deep, deep centered place inside that is not affected by external fluctuations. Recently, I've been talking about the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows, how joy turns to sorrow and sorrow turns to joy if we give it enough time. You know, our team fumbles and it's the end of the world. We're crushed. Your team fumbles and we are ecstatic. Equanimity is the liberating quality that allows you to keep your heart open and balanced. It's a quiet and steady quality of awareness in the midst of all the changes. And it's been described as an openness to experience without being lost in reactions, without being caught in greed and hatred. It's a profound state of balance. It supports wisdom because it supports that unshakable, steady mind, so you can actually see what's true. But it also supports compassion because it helps you stay connected to empathy rather than being thrown into reactivity. And this sense of steadiness, of equanimity, the possibility of it, this is why we meditate. It's really considered the flower of a meditation practice. It's kind of the essence of it. When you have moments of that steadiness, of that equanimity, it can give you the courage to face the pain in your life and to actually face the cruelty of the world. It's also a sublime emotional quality. It's a wonderful quality of happiness. Just the capacity to let things be as they are. It's a state of non-desire, a state of gratitude and appreciation. It's exquisite. It's a very, very delicate state, like a very delicate flower. And like delicate flowers, they often require a lot of nurturing and a lot of attention for them to thrive and to bloom and to blossom. So, how do you cultivate equanimity? How do you cultivate that steadiness, particularly in wild times like these? One doorway is to explore what gets in the way. A number of years ago, I was in a pretty deep dialogue with a CEO who was struggling in his business. He said, "You know, I'm trying so hard, but there's just this knot inside, this anxiety that I just can't get away from." He told me how in the beginning he was a total stud when he got his MBA and took off into the business world. He was fresh to it. He was excited. He wasn't afraid of taking risks, and he had a lot of success in the beginning. And he pretty much based the rest of his life on that continuing success that he anticipated. And of course, because he had based his life on that, he had also set himself up financially, living relatively well. You know, not denying himself anything, and was living at pretty high expense stuff going on. So what happened was he had a couple failures. A couple deals fell through. And then his confidence started to get shaky. And he said he went from being like on top of the world to feeling his personal mojo kind of spinning down. And so we began to investigate that. And as we say, your issues are in your tissues. And when he sort of took this whole narrative around, his mojo disappearing, his confidence disappearing, he explored where he felt it on the inside. And for him, it was just this deep, deep clench in the core of his belly. And we took some time to hang out with it. Well, what is it? I asked him if there were really any emotional words that were in it. And, we sort of just hung out with it, really practicing this essential teaching of having tea with your demons, to sit down with what's between you and feeling happy and to get to know it. And he realized at some point, he said, I am terrified of failing. I can't stop thinking about what's going to happen if all this just crashes. And as we talked more, he came from a family tradition of men who were really successful in business. And he was terrified of being the first in his lineage to fail. And he said, I couldn't take the disappointment on my father's face if I don't pull this off. And along with that was such a deep sense of feeling lonely, a deep sense of feeling absolutely clenched on the inside. So it's one thing to see what's true, and this certainly seemed to be true. This deep, deep-seated fear of failure. The other is to explore how to be with it. And so we drew on loving presence, calling on empathy and kindness. And for the first time in many, many years, he began to sense the possibility of offering himself a little bit of empathy for all he had gone through. And he began to feel a release of some kind. Just the possibility of letting go. It wasn't like angels filled the room and it was all filled with light and he knew exactly what to do. But he was able to begin to soften that really, really deep-seated clench. And was able to start making some choices that could support him. And a big one for him was asking for help. When I checked in with him later, he found tremendous peace in confiding with some friends, getting some coaching, and he felt like he was not only beginning to get his business back, but he felt like I'm somehow getting my life back too. I imagine you could relate to something in there. Have you felt some kind of unseen, unfelt force that colors your experience and drives your behaviors in ways that might feel a little bit curious? And this really speaks to some of the factors that get in the way of equanimity, that sense of unshakable steadiness. And they're oftentimes referred to as the 8 worldly winds. And they have to do with grasping and fear. Grasping for praise and the fear of blame. Grasping for gain and the fear of losing. Grasping for pleasure and the fear of pain. And grasping for fame and the fear of shame. Can you sense how much your life is driven by these forces? People pour their entire life force into chasing or avoiding. I know many, many extremely successful people who are driven by the fear of failure and the fear of shame. It's not to say that these desires and fears, there aren't some qualities in there that can be helpful. We want to do well. We want to be wholesome. We want to live our lives fully. But when we are driven by that intense clench of desire and the intense aversion of fear, then we're not living fully. So when we speak of equanimity, of steadiness, it's really kind of the absence of these qualities. So just for a moment, if you like, this is like a 1-minute meditation. If you like, you can close your eyes. And if you close your eyes and you just take 3 slow, deep breaths. One way just to glimpse this possibility of equanimity or steadiness is to sense who you are in the absence of them. So just for a moment, can you imagine who you are free of wanting? Free of wanting praise, of wanting gain, of wanting pleasure, of wanting fame. Can you imagine for a moment who you are in the absence of fear? The fear of being blamed, the fear of losing, the fear of pain, and the fear of shame. In the absence of desire, and in the absence of aversion, there can be a still place inside. If you like, you can deepen your breath. And if you like, you can open your eyes, or you're going to remain with them closed. No one's watching you. You know, when I imagine this absence of desire and fear, the absence of the eight worldly winds, it reminds me of seeing a small child playing. You know, there's no fear. There's just this discovery of the moment. Not to say we should be like little children all the time, but there's something, I think, something we can learn here. Learning how to cultivate steadiness, equanimity. As I was reflecting on this, I was thinking about back when I was president of Kripalu Center many, many years ago, and I would read the guest evaluations. Like 30,000 guests a year, a lot of evaluations. I certainly didn't read them all, but I remember one time in particular, I was just flipping through the evaluations, and I actually read these evaluations in sequence. The food is too spicy. The food is too bland. I found the food too salty. There's not enough salt in the food. This facility is too busy and too loud for me. This facility feels like a tomb. There's nothing going on. I realized in reading these evaluations and more that we are just pure reaction machines. All we do is just react. Something happens, we create a story. How do we move beyond it? Is there a way that we can move beyond just pure reactivity? And there's one particular little meditation. It's kind of a technique. It's a little bit of a simile, but it might be interesting just to try on. And this is the sense of embracing the metaphor of a mountain as you meditate. I mentioned this briefly in the meditation preceding, but we'll take just a few minutes just to get a taste of this. You may find it to be a handy tool. So if you like, again, you can close your eyes. And as you're ready, you might slow down and deepen your breath. And you might just take a few moments just to feel the present moment. Feel the weight of the arms, the weight of the legs. Notice where you feel the breath on the inside. And you might just feel the breath and just for a few moments just watch the natural inflow and the out-breath. And you might bring into mind the image of a mountain. Maybe it's a favorite mountain in your life or a beautiful mountain that you recall from your memory. And as you just imagine this mountain, just sense its base rooted in the bedrock of the earth. Noticing how it's not moving. And can you imagine if just for a moment your body as this mountain? Steady, connected to the base of the earth and unmoving. Can you imagine your legs and your buttocks as the base? And can you sense this unwavering presence of the mountain in that same way, the unwavering presence of your awareness? And you might sense how just as the mountain, the days turn to night, the nights turn to days. In winter, imagine the mountain covered with ice. The ice giving way to warmth and green and flowers. The flowers giving way to the blooming time of summer. And summer passing to the colors of fall. And into winter. And can you imagine around this steady, unmoving mountain are also weather systems, clear skies, dry air, of rain, fog, violent winds at times. And just imagine in these remaining moments this sense of strength and stability in the midst of all that changes. And so gently you can deepen your breath. As you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. There's something in this opening to the sense of steadiness or equanimity that calls for us to kind of broaden our awareness. Just as with the mountain, when you reflect on how day turns to night, night turns to day, seasons come, seasons go, and yet there is something that remains in that same way in your life. Joys turn to sorrow, sorrow turns to joy. As your body ages, there is something ageless. It can be tremendously helpful. So one element of cultivating equanimity is just to remember that there is a quality of steadiness that is already present. Now we have the capacity to glimpse it. The other way to work it is to be more and more aware of your reactivity, to be more and more aware of what is happening and how you're relating to it. Which leads me to read one of my favorite readings from one of my favorite people on the planet, the immortal Dave Barry, who talks a little bit about his reactivity. I'm in an airplane, strapped into my seat, no way to escape. For an hour we've been taxiing around Miami International Airport while lightning tries to hit us. Earlier, I was hoping that the plane might at some point actually take off and fly to our intended destination, but now I'm starting to root for the lightning, because a direct strike might silence the two women sitting in front of me. There's only one empty seat between them, but they're speaking at a decibel level that would be appropriate if one of them were in Cleveland. Also, they both have Blitherer's disease, which occurs when there is no filter attached to the brain, so that every thought the victim has, no matter how minor, comes blurting right out. This means that the rest of us passengers are being treated to a repartee such as this. I prefer a window seat. Oh, not me. I always prefer an aisle seat. That's just like my son. He lives in New Jersey, and he also prefers an aisle seat also. My sister-in-law works for a dentist in New Jersey. He's an excellent dentist, but he can't pronounce his R's. He says, I'm afraid you need a root canal. My brother-in-law just had that root canal. He was bleeding all over the car he had, one of those Japanese ones, what do you call it, a Lexus. I prefer a Buick, but let me tell you, this insurance, who can afford it? I have a brother in the insurance business with angina. He prefers a window seat. Oh, not me. I would prefer an aisle seat. Now my daughter. And so it goes for one solid hour, a live broadcast of random neural firings. The harder I try to ignore it, the more my brain focuses on it. But it could be worse. I could be the flight attendant. I love that story because just as it seems like the world has blitherer's disease, we also have blitherer's disease. And when we're not paying attention, all we're doing is reacting. And if we're not aware of our reactions, we are just a pinball in a pinball machine, bouncing around from one thing to the next. So noticing reactivity can be tremendously helpful. Noticing that it's all about stimulus and response. Something happens and then you respond. And if you can open up the gap between stimulus and response, blitherer's disease can sort of fall away. And then you can begin to explore what it's like to respond with awareness to what is happening instead of reacting to what is happening. There's so much more to say about noticing reactivity, but just to say that one very, very powerful practice is to notice that whenever anything arises, at its most, not its, at a very fundamental level, it will either feel pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Everything falls into one of those three camps. And when you can start to hone your awareness on pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral in your reactivity, sometimes you can notice that before it proliferates into thoughts and stories and blitherer's disease. Something happens, you like it, you expand. Something happens, you don't like it, you contract. Nothing happens, you get bored. Paying attention to that can be very, very fruitful. But I'd like to speak a little bit, with a little bit of time I have left, about kind of the long-term cultivation of equanimity. It's one thing to just to tune into it and sense it. It's another thing to sort of become more aware of your reactivity and sense if you can slow things down and be able to respond rather than react. But another is looking more and more intimately at the nature of reality itself. It's very, very helpful to have a personal practice, but also to read about the practice. I find that to be tremendously helpful because sometimes you'll read something from the original texts or some interpretation of these original texts that just the lights will come on. And it's a very powerful experience when you begin to verify something on the inside that really speaks of perennial truth. Many, many years ago, when I first encountered the teaching on the three characteristics of reality, it was kind of a remarkable thing. The first being impermanence. Everything changes. Everything born out of causes and conditions is subject to change. Just recognizing that is so powerful. Everything is changing. And then to explore your relationship to what's changing. The second characteristic of reality. The first is anicca, or impermanence. The second is dukkha, or the stress, the dissatisfaction, or the suffering that shows up in relationship to how you react to what is changing. If you don't like it and you resist it, to that degree you will suffer. If you can let it be, no suffering. The third points toward anatta, which is really this beautiful teaching that nothing whatsoever is to be clung to as I or mine. Impermanence, the stress or dissatisfaction that comes from your relationship to impermanence, and in remembering that nothing is to be clung to as I or mine. And where it really struck me once was when I had read this on a retreat, and I was just sitting quietly, and there were some crows around the meditation hall, kind of calling out to each other. And as I just listened to the crows, I watched my mind saying, this is really distracting. Well, actually, this is kind of interesting. And then I just thought, can I just drop the story and just experience the sound? And suddenly, when I just allowed the sounds to be there just as they were without resisting them, there became a really, really wonderful sense of ease. And then when I thought of this idea that nothing is to be clung to as I or mine, that I actually have no control over the sounds, suddenly I began to feel a real deep sense of spaciousness. The sounds were just sounds. If I could really, truly let them be, there was kind of an ecstatic quality to it. When I wasn't trying to control it or own it or anything at all, it gave me a very profound and kind of a sustained glimpse into this sense of equanimity. And I find oftentimes doing a sound meditation is really, really helpful. This morning, in fact, I was meditating outside, and here it is spring, and birds everywhere, and the occasional airplane, fewer of them these days, and just opening to the sounds, letting them be as they are, not resisting, no clinging, just allowing, allowed me to feel this sense of very, very deep spaciousness for a while. So I would like to invite you into a little meditation here, just to reflect on these qualities. If you like, you can close your eyes. And you might find it helpful to take 3 slow and full deep breaths. Notice where you feel the breath on the inside. And take a few moments now to open your awareness to the sounds around you. Can you identify the sounds that are the closest to you and the sounds that are at the furthest edge of your awareness? And you might take a moment now just to name the source of each sound and its location. And now, is it possible to let go of any labeling and just to let the sounds be vibration? Can you experience the sounds as just pure vibration without any name? And you'll notice that you can't do this better by trying harder. Instead, there's kind of a relaxing and a sense of receiving the sound vibrations. And is it possible to let go of any sense of good or bad? Letting go of any need to control the sounds, but to truly let them be. And for the next few moments, how deeply can you relax? How deeply can you allow things to arise and allow the sounds to change all by themselves? You might now gently deepen your breath. And if you like, you can open your eyes. Part of the teaching here is, with sound, for example, that when you're perceiving through sound, if a sound is pleasant, to not lust after it. And if a sound is displeasing, to not dislike it. To truly let it be as it is a doorway to this sense of equanimity or steadiness. So remembering these three characteristics of reality can be a powerful, powerful remembrance. To remember that everything changes. To remember that your relationship to what is changing will determine the degree to which you experience stress and dissatisfaction. If you hold on, you'll get rope burn. If you can let it go, there'll be a sense of ease. And to imagine that there is nothing here whatsoever to be clung to as I or mine. It is all happening by itself. So this quote: when a practitioner has discerned formations by attributing the three characteristics of impermanence, suffering, and non-self, and one sees them as empty in this way, she abandons both terror and delight and becomes indifferent to them and neutral. The practitioner takes neither them as I nor as mine, and is like a person who has divorced a spouse, and in so doing has become unaffected by the doings of the ex-spouse. I was really struck by that. This is from like a couple thousand years ago. Think of this as an ex-spouse who would really get under your skin. But once you're divorced, you don't concern yourself with them anymore. It's an interesting little metaphor there. But remembering everything changes. Your relationship to what is changing determines your stress level. And if it's possible to remember that nothing whatsoever is to be clung to as I or mine, that's such a potent teaching. And one of my favorite remembrances from the third Zen patriarch, it's all kind of summed up right here. The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. Make the slightest distinction, however, between heaven and earth are set infinitely apart. If you wish to see the truth, then hold no opinions for or against anything. To set up what you like against what you dislike is a disease of the mind. When the deep meaning of things is not understood, the mind's essential peace is disturbed to no avail. So how do we apply this in our lives when there's so much going on? Equanimity, in a sense, it kind of implies that there's kind of a passivity to life, and it is not at all about being passive. If you're hot, you can open a window. If you're hungry, you can eat. But when you cannot control your external experience, you can perhaps find an inner refuge. And this is your capacity to be equanimous. There's a near enemy to equanimity. It's kind of looks like it, but it's not it. And that is indifference. It's very easy to see things change and to disengage our heart, to disengage your empathy and your compassion. The practice is all about feeling both equanimity and being able to respond to suffering, but to respond to suffering with wisdom. From Thich Nhat Hanh: we shed all discrimination and prejudice and remove all boundaries between ourselves and others. In a conflict, even though we are deeply concerned, we remain impartial and able to love and understand both sides. This is all part of the flower of practice, of your capacity to disengage from the drama of the sports field, where every fumble is a crushing defeat and every interception is an eternal celebration of winning. It's remembering that in the absence of desire, in the absence of fear, there is a steadiness of presence. And in that steadiness of presence, there is a deep capacity for wisdom, to see clearly, to see what is true, and a deep capacity for compassion, to be able to open to a heart that can embrace suffering and respond to suffering with wisdom. Let's close with just a few moments of silence. If you like, you can close your eyes. And you might now just slow down and deepen your breath once again. We'll end with a short inquiry. As you now move into a few moments of self-observation without judgment, can you notice everything that is changing? And can you sense inside this inner quality of reactivity, of the impulse to respond to that which is pleasant with a sense of joy, respond to something perceived as painful with a sense of concern or with a clench? And you might just sense how this flow or stream is ongoing, stimulus and response. And can you imagine here for just a few moments of who you are in the absence of good or bad, in the absence of liking or disliking? The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. Make the slightest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set infinitely apart. As you're ready, you can deepen your breath. As you're ready, you can open your eyes. There's kind of a good news, bad news thing here. The bad news is that in this stream or this flow of phenomena, that you will constantly get lost in reactivity, celebrating the wins, grieving the losses, caught in aversion, caught in desire. The good news is that many times you can remember. You can bring yourself back to this quality of steadiness, recognizing that in the midst of change, that there is perhaps something that doesn't change. A quality of wisdom, a quality of compassion in a dance with that wisdom. And that can be a guide, and that can be a refuge, and that can illuminate your path. Thank you so much for your time and attention. It was great to be with you, and I wish you well. Happy, happy trails.